I thought that after that evening, when he revealed my long-standing secret to everyone, there would be an emptiness inside me. But silence never came. Instead, something heavy and vibrating settled in its place. It was a constant hum that didn't let me sleep, didn't let me eat, and certainly didn't let me think. It felt like a separate creature living inside me, feeding on my anxiety. Every small thing became proof of his indifference. Him not taking my hand as we walked, his gaze drifting past me, him forgetting to ask how my day was. I slowly realized I no longer believed a single one of his movements. It was like watching a performance where I knew the actor was just going through the motions, and he didn't seem to notice my growing suspicion. Or maybe he just pretended not to. Dima could be distant for a whole week, cold and remote, and then suddenly appear with flowers. It felt less like a gesture of love and more like he was checking a box on a list titled, "How to be a good husband." Everything's fine, see? I bought flowers. Meanwhile, I felt like a piece of furniture in our home, part of the interior design he'd long grown tired of. Sometimes I was just background noise in the soundtrack of his life, and every time I tried to talk, to bridge the gap that was widening between us, he'd pull out his favorite line. "You're being too emotional." Those words, they cut deeper than any shout ever could. They invalidated everything I felt, as if my hurt, my confusion, my loneliness were just character flaws. It was a verbal anesthetic, meant to numb me, to make me quiet, as if I had no right to my own feelings. I held on, for a long, long time. So long, in fact, that I started to lose my sense of how things used to be. The memory of our beginning, of laughter and connection, grew faint and blurry. Days would pass when I couldn't even remember what it felt like to be loved by him. It seemed like we had always lived this way, two strangers sharing a space, two people who had completely forgotten how to hear each other. And then he appeared. He wasn't some mysterious stranger from a romance novel. Not a dramatic, swooping savior. He was just a man from work, a colleague, who one day held my gaze a little longer than what's considered normal. A little longer than someone without any intention would dare to. The scariest part wasn't his gaze, it was my reaction. I responded. Not with a flirtatious smile or a witty comeback. I responded with a profound sense of relief. He listened to me. He actually listened, without interrupting, without offering solutions, and most importantly, without judging. I'd say something silly and he would smile, asking a follow-up question. I'd complain about being exhausted and he'd quietly bring me a coffee a few minutes later. They were such small gestures, nothing you could point to as intimate or inappropriate. But those tiny, almost insignificant acts of kindness started to stitch together the very wounds my own husband never even bothered to look at. I found myself waiting for his messages. A simple, "How was your meeting?" or "Did you get home okay?" I'd check my phone, my heart doing a little flip when his name popped up. I started wanting to hear my name in his voice, to hear how it sounded when spoken with warmth and interest. I was ashamed of these feelings, but it was the kind of shame that pushes you forward instead of holding you back. Because next to Dima, I felt like I no longer existed. But next to this man, I felt myself coming back to life. I was becoming visible again. Everything shattered the night I saw a notification on my husband's phone. It was lying face up on the nightstand. Just one little pop-up bubble. But it broke the last, most fragile piece inside of me. "Isn't it a little late for a call?" a woman wrote. Her name was hidden. Her profile picture was blank. But the tone. I recognized that tone immediately. It was warm. It was alive. It was the tone he hadn't used with me in months, maybe even years. He said it was a colleague, that she had simply mixed up the time for a work call, that I was, of course, dramatizing again. But I didn't hear his excuses. My mind filtered them out. All I could hear was something I hadn't heard from him in so long. Genuine interest, alive and palpable, and it was directed at someone else. That night, I left. There was no dramatic door slam, no screaming, no throwing of accusations. I simply stood up, grabbed my coat and my keys and walked out into the cold night air. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house for another second. As I walked down the street, a car pulled up. It was him, the colleague. He must have seen my message, a desperate jumble of words I don't even remember typing. He stepped out, his face etched with concern. He took one look at my face, at the silent tears streaming down my cheeks, and he understood everything without me having to say a single word. We didn't plan anything. We didn't even talk. He just opened the passenger door, and I got in. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to fall apart. The dam I had built so carefully, brick by emotional brick, finally broke. My affair didn't begin when our lips finally touched later that night, or when his hand gently slid down my back, offering a comfort I craved. It began much, much earlier. It began in the silence of my own home. It began the moment I stopped feeling needed, wanted, or even seen by my own husband. That night wasn't about passion. It was a night born of desperation. A night where I was trying to prove to myself more than anyone else that I still mattered, that I wasn't just a shadow in someone else's life. But when the morning came, and the first rays of sunlight crept into the unfamiliar room, I woke up with a crushing, heavy feeling. I had tried to find myself in the arms of another person, but in doing so, I realized I had betrayed myself even more than he had ever betrayed me. And that was a loneliness far deeper than any I had ever known. Thanks for listening. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, know you're not alone. Don't forget to follow for more stories.